Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we have a very fun video. It is a new series I'm starting where I'm going to discuss games that I've completed and whether they deserve to have the notoriety surrounding their platinum in terms of difficulty or grind or really whatever else they're notorious for. So today we are going to go over Wolfenstein 2. It is a game that I think every single trophy hunter has heard of and has either played or seen some sort of gameplay of. So, with these new videos, going to kind of be right off the cuff. I don't have a script written for it. I'm not going to be doing any editing for them. Just going to kind of voice some opinions I have on them, and if I sound like a moron going through them, it kind of is what it is. So, let's get into Wolfenstein 2 and whether I think it deserves to have this difficulty rating. I think the most objective way to look at these is to look at the PSN trophy guides. I know these games have a lot of subjectivity to them, and some people have strengths and weaknesses surrounding genres of games. Me, for instance, I'm awful at racing games, so any guide I see on PSN, I'm probably going to add a couple points to. But setting that aside, I think it's the most objective way to kind of look at these games. And I'm sure everyone knows Wolfenstein 2, 10 out of 10. I think they might have it at 50 hours. The 50-hour thing I pretty heavily disagree with. But we're not really going to look at that. We're going to look at the 10 out of 10 and whether I think it deserves it. The short answer to that is no. I do not think that it deserves a 10 out of 10. And we're going to get into some of the reasons why. I might have some hot takes in there, but by the end, I think I'll be able to wrap it up pretty well. So let's start off looking at the game in general. I think Wolfenstein 2, compared to other first person shooter games, kind of like Call of Duty, is just inherently more challenging. I think it has to do with the fact that compared to Call of Duty, you don't just regain all your health back when you take damage. It's not just normal soldiers and like tanks you're fighting. They have these super soldiers and those giant asshole guys that I never remember their names. So I think just in general, at like a normal difficulty, this game is harder than other FPS games. Um, Two, and this is something I was never fully able to put my finger on. The game never felt fluid. Like even after getting the 100%, the game never felt super smooth. And I'm not sure why. It might be because like you sway kind of back and forth, but it does add, I think, a little to the challenge when you're playing. Um, Three, there's a lot of parkour in this game, like a lot. And if you miss parkour jumps, you kind of just get a game over, which doesn't feel great at like a kind of a janky first-person shooter game. And I want to go over something else very briefly that I kind of go over in my trophy video. And if you guys want to see like a full breakdown of all the trophies in this game, you can go over to the YouTube channel and watch that whole thing. I'll put a link for it at the end of the video. But to get through the campaign's about 5 hours, and there's over 250 collectibles in the game. So it's not hard. It doesn't add to the like 10 out of 10, but it is just something that kind of wears you down and just it's just an extra couple punches thrown at you. And that's kind of going to be the theme, I think, of this video and what's going on with all of it. So those are all kind of just miscellaneous things that make the game a little more challenging than other FPS games in general. But let's get into why, everyone is here, and that is Mein Leben, the single trophy that makes this a 10 out of 10 on PSN. And I'm sure everyone who clicked on this video knows what Mein Leben is at this point. But for those of you who don't, it is the hardest difficulty in the game, and the trophy is just beat the game on Mein Leben. Sounds easy enough. Um, So what this entails is it takes the hardest difficulty other than this. I think it's I Am Death Incarnate, maybe. And it adds a catch in that it's a permadeath mode on that difficulty. So if you lose all your health, you go right back to the main menu. There's no saving, so you can't save scum. You also have to do it in one sitting, which I think is the biggest part of this, and I think what we're going to be going over a lot of. So you have to kind of carve out a 5 hour window to play, this hard game. And if you get one shot by someone, that's too bad. You're going back to the start. So, breaking the game down into kind of all the different areas, I don't think any of these areas are that difficult, even on the hardest difficulties. And there's so many different guides on YouTube. I think the Wolfenstein 2 community has done an excellent job in making guides for this game. And if you just take one part, whether, it's New York or whether it's Roswell or New Orleans, Venus, whatever it is, none of them are particularly difficult. So you could go through them and have a pretty okay time, like 90% of the time. But the problem is kind of putting them all together. But why I think that these individual parts aren't that bad is because this game is not kind of a normal first person shooter game, and that it's a lot of reaction, positioning. This game is so heavily scripted, and that if you follow the same path and do the same things, about like 90-95% of the time, the enemies are going to behave in the exact same way every single time. So if you like follow a wall on the left and crouch the whole time, an enemy will just stand there looking at the other wall, and you'll be able to kind of come up behind them and get a one shot. And every area kind of functions in this way. But what I think is the hardest part of all of this is, you guys notice how I said 90 to 95% of the time they behave that way? It's that last like 5 to 10% that I think makes this awful. And let me just kind of explain this a little more. So, if you go through an area, and I'll just use my one of my examples. Towards the end of the game, when you're back on the ship towards the end, there's a super soldier. And I think went through this area maybe around 20 times. Then every time you follow this path, he's just staring off into the distance. He doesn't move, he doesn't go on patrol anywhere. He just sits there, stares off in the distance. There was one single time out of the 20 times I did this where he just decided to turn around. There was no rhyme or reason, wasn't running, wasn't shooting. He just turned around and blasted me in the face, and my game was over. And this was at the very end of the game. But 19 other times when I go through there, he does the exact same thing when I follow that path I followed. And if you elongate that across the entire game, or like each encounter, like 19 out of 20 times, everything will go the exact same way. Those things add up. And if each part of the game it only happens once, like it's going to take a lot of attempts to get through this where everything's going to kind of line up perfectly. And this is, I think, the first part where I don't think the game is a 10 out of 10 in the sense that a lot of people think it is. So I think when people hear 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, they automatically assume it's a mechanically difficult game. And that I don't know if I have the skills to go and do this game. I think this game is more annoying than difficult in a lot of aspects. And I think the best example I could give is if you imagine you and your friend are arguing as to who is better at Overwatch. And your friend says they started Overwatch back when it first came out. And, they play casually. They play maybe once every couple months, have maybe 100 hours in the game. And you started playing Overwatch 2, but you have like 500 hours in it. Maybe you got up to like diamond rank. They hover around like low gold. Every time you play, you have like an insane KD. They have a negative KD. This isn't a hard argument for you to win. But let's say you keep arguing, and every time you bring up these points, all they say is, yeah, well, I started playing Overwatch before you, so I'm better. And every point you make, they just keep saying that. This obviously is not a difficult argument to win. You won the argument. It is more annoying in getting them to admit that you won. And I feel like that with this game a lot. And I think the so this is where I think the hot take and where things kind of make more sense. Where I think the difficulty in this game lies is having the resilience to overcome the game, as opposed to the mechanical skills required to overcome this game. And what do I mean by that? Having to go through, you know, 3, 4, 5 hours of kind of the same thing over and over again becomes very repetitive. And I have a lot of friends who I think are better at like shooter games than me, but never in a million years would be able to go and platinum this game simply because they cannot keep redoing the same thing over and over again. And starting from the beginning of the game with the wheelchair section, it's not difficult. Like you practice it once and you could get through it, like 80% of the time. Uh, it might be a little annoying having to sit through the unskippable cutscene in the beginning and watching a dog get shot and some like racist asshole like yelling at you. But it's like 7 to 10 minute cutscene and you kind of get into the wheelchair section and it's not particularly difficult. But if you have to redo it, 10, 20, 30 times, it becomes very draining. And then you can move on to New York, the section right after. Again, most of the parts individually are not that difficult. You do have to pay attention to your pathing and making sure you're doing the same thing that you always do, but it's not difficult. And it becomes kind of brainless once you go through the game a couple times through your Mein Leben runs. But because you can die in these games so unbelievably fast, you do have to pay attention a lot, even though it's not difficult to get through. And I think those two things combined makes for a very tedious and annoying process to get through. Because if you kind of let your guard down and you just start letting your mind wander, you'll probably get blown up pretty fast. But if you are paying attention, you'll get through most of these parts really without issue. But the fact that it takes hours to get back to kind of the middle of the game, which is where things pick up a little bit, and the fact that you have to do it kind of all in one sitting. You could pause the game and come back, but at the end of the day, like you're not really taking a break in between these things. Like you're sitting down and you're in there for a journey. But I want to go through some of those other areas, including Roswell, which is right after New York. Again, there's not many difficult parts. Going back to what I said, that 19 out of 20 times, all the enemies function the exact same way. But it's that 1 out of 20 time where enemy will randomly turn around when they never have done that before, and now your run's over. And about like that hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it is, to get back to that point, it just slowly chips away at your well-being and your motivation and your drive to finish and complete the game. And I think for me personally, I hate having time wasted in games where you could spend hours doing something and then just have all your progress erased. It's equivalent to having like a save file corrupted, and then you just put this time and you got nothing out of it, and now you get to restart it. And That happened to me in Roswell before, where enemy just turned around randomly. There's a couple parkour sections, and going back to the beginning of the video, this game feels janky when you're playing it, which isn't awful. There's a lot of games that feel janky, but the problem is that this game has a lot of parkour and a first-person shooter game with janky controls. And if you miss a single parkour section, you just fall and you're just instantly done and have to go right back to the main menu. And I think even when I was like 20 attempts into my Mein Leben runs, I think I was more nervous and anxious anytime I knew a parkour section was coming up because it just felt like it was out of my control. And that's just another thing that just kind of beats you down, makes you feel worse, destroys your well being, your motivation. And that is ultimately where I think the difficulty in this game lies. It's not in, am I going to be able to shoot them well enough? The gunfights in this game are very, very, very easy because they have that lean mechanic where you could go up against a wall and lean out. The gunfights, I think, are the easiest part of this game. And ultimately, in a first person shooter game, that should make it probably like a 5 out of 10 at most, right? I can't think of many other first person shooter games where the shooting part is the easiest part. So the mechanical skills, you need very little. You could even follow a guide like step by step throughout your Mind Leben run, so you don't even need the skill of memorization or game sense of like knowing where to go and what to do. But it's that you're 2 hours in the game and you could die to glitches in this. I had that happen to me in the DLC Mein Leben. I fell through the map. In my normal Mein Leben run, about halfway through the game, you're going up an elevator. There were no enemies, and my game was just over. I like watched it back. I wasn't getting shot. There were no explosives. There was just some glitch, and just fell over. Game over. And when you're 10, 20 attempts in, you just wasted 2 hours having to go back and redo all these kind of parts where you can get one shot very quickly, but they're not hard. If you're kind of following what you need to do, you could get through it pretty easily, like I said. But knowing that you have to go through all of that to maybe just get screwed over by a glitch later, just it's these things that just kind of keep chipping away at you. And to be honest, I've never felt so defeated playing a video game in my life. Usually I'm either excited or at least like indifferent. Like I could get through this game pretty fast, but it might be a little boring, whatever. This was the first game I ever felt where I felt almost despair having to come on. And I was just like, this is terrible. I'd rather just go to work than have to go and play this game. So that's all these things that I'm mentioning. They just keep chipping away at you to the point where you don't really feel like playing the game anymore. And going back to now that I mentioned work, for people who are working, semi normal hours or days, this game's really difficult to platinum, being that you have to sit there for 5-ish hours. And as a working adult, there's not a lot of time to do that, which makes the little time you have, if you're going for this and then you die to a grenade that you never saw on the map or a glitch or an enemy not behaving like they do 90% of the time, it's more of these things that just keep chipping away at your motivation. So, realistically, in terms of difficulty, I don't agree with the 10 out of 10. And in my video, I kind of discussed that a little bit, but I think this game's more, in terms of like mechanical skill, is maybe around a 6 or a 7. However, I think this game has a different difficulty that doesn't get rated in a PSN profile. I think if you were looking at just your mental well being and having motivation to get through a game, and the difficulty of having that resilience to keep pushing through when you know your game keeps ending. I think this game could honestly be a 9 out of 10 in terms of requiring that resiliency skill. So, I know, might be a little clickbaity with the title that I don't think the game is a 10 out of 10, but I gave it a 10 out of 10 difficulty in something else. Maybe a little hypocritical, but that's fine because I don't think a lot of people think of this type of game that way. And I know when I see difficulty ratings on PSN, I always think of, do I have the skills to do that? If I see XCOM 2, do I know enough about strategy games to get through it? And this game is not like that at all. And I'll just share with you guys another story while I was going through this game before I wrap this up. Towards the end, the only fight when that I think is not scripted really is and it's unfortunate, it's the very last fight of the game. And the first part of it's pretty scripted, but once you go kind of below deck, you don't really know when or where the enemies are going to come from. They could come from four different areas. And that's the part that I think does require some like gun skill. And I died during there, I think it was three or four times at the very end of the game, getting all the way there, which was just a horrible feeling knowing that I was that close. And one time it was the very last enemy. I had almost no health and I saw gunshots and I was just looking around trying to figure out where they were coming from, like one of the four ways. And instead of just like shooting, continually shooting like all the other enemies did, he shot once and then just sprinted and kicked me in the head. And that was it, and went right back to the main menu. So being able to the following day turn on your PlayStation and say, I'm going to go and take another attempt at this, I think is where the difficulty and the true difficulty of this game lies. And it's not just being like, I'm just going to give this another shot, it's whatever, but being able to be engaged in the game and not making stupid mistakes, that'll just end your game instantly, is where I think a lot of people struggle and why I think this game has such a notorious, difficult platinum viewing. It's not because people lack the mechanical skills of playing this game versus, some fighting games, maybe like Ultimate Marvel versus Capcom 3, that it requires an immense skill set to get through. I think it's because a lot of people either don't want to deal with having that resilience of getting through this. They cannot have the time. They cannot have their like having their time wasted. I think there's a lot of different things here that kind of play into the difficulty that I'm talking about with this. And I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say and people who have done it, because I think everyone that I've talked to so far kind of agrees that it's not as hard as people say. But I think this mindset and what it does to your mental well-being is really, really understated, and it's not something that's going to show up in a difficulty ranking. So, like I said multiple times throughout this video, no, I do not think it deserves to be thought of as difficult as it is. But I also think, yes, it does deserve to be thought of as difficult as it is, just a different type of difficulty that no one really thinks about, no one really talks about. So, kind of gave a non-answer answer with that. But like I said, I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about this and if people agree with me on this game being more mentally taxing than the traditional, like, difficult type game. I think this is comparable to maybe like Super Meat Boy in that sense that that's a game I'll be getting to at some point, but that seems more mechanically skill driven than just put your head down, keep grinding, and eventually you'll kind of get it. So I appreciate you guys all tuning in to listen to my rant on how I don't think this game is nearly as difficult as people make it out to seem. And if you guys want to see my whole trophy journey through this game, I will link the video. You can just click it right at the end of the video. And thank you guys so much for joining in. Check out the other videos. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. I'll leave a link for the Discord in the description below. Have a lot of fun stuff going on there, including titles for different games. If we have a little sub channel that if you need help with a game, you could ask, and I'll either hop in and help. I'll drop some items so you don't need my help, or at least give you kind of tips and tricks or what guide I use to get through something. And I'll also leave a link for the Twitch channel in the description. Stream all my games over at Twitch. Have a lot of fun there. And I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.